Hey guys, welcome to Ironis Insights. We got another episode here. Really special guest today, John Gibson from Prometheus Cybersecurity. John, you want to go ahead and give yourself a little introduction? Tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you are, and what does Prometheus do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast today. So my career, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in rural Indiana, which is kind of, humble beginnings for a guy that launched himself into large enterprise, in his career. But I went off to college, got my degree in computer science, and I got recruited out of college to go to Silicon Valley. It was like at the time I thought it was like my be all end all, life goal bucket list to get to California, and I got out there and. The luster kinda wore off a little bit, but, I mean, I spent a year in Silicon Valley at a small startup you may have heard of called Veritas Software. They became a big juggernaut in the storage industry for many, many years, so I started in tech support, and then I went off, after a year, I kinda missed the Midwest a little bit, so I moved back to, Indiana for a bit and then ended up in Chicago, but, in all of that, it was about 4 or 5 years later, I came back to Veritas as a professional services, consultant, and so I did implementations and some, custom programming for about 3 or 4 years. Then I get into education, and I realized that that was really kind of a calling for me. I did that for a couple years, and then an opportunity opened up to join the SE ranks, the sales engineers ranks. And I had some friends that were sales engineers, and I took the role, and it really hit a tuning fork with me because I was able to be technical, but I was able to be social and talk with customers and evangelize software. And that was really part of my gift again, because aside from my degree in computer science, I had a background in theater. And so, being able
I feel like
to
that's a rare combo. Having
well, it is, and I recognized that early on. I remember back in college, and this being, my inner geek showing out. We had these little ASCII, these really elaborate email signatures. I remember having a little, email ASCII image of the Starship Enterprise, and the quote was a synthesis of computer science and theater technology, which just kind of put the nail on the head for me because I did really excel at. I mean, I did some acting, but I was really more of a technical theater person, behind the scenes, aesthetics, lighting design, things of that nature. But it did, there was always this teaching element in the background somewhere along the way. So I went on to be SC, and over the last 20 years, most of my jobs have been a very technical seller based role. And I've done some teaching on the side. I realized within the last couple of years that, everything I've done has had some level of teaching and education to it. So that kind of helped drive the direction and the mission statement of Prometheus. And we're here. Obviously, there's an allegory to the Greek mythology, the god Prometheus who took fire from Olympus to give it to humankind. We look to that parallel to say we're bringing enterprise level security solutions and consulting to the small and mid-sized business because humble beginnings going up in Indiana. There needs to be an advocate for the smaller companies, the little guy, and a lot of entrepreneurs and SMB owners, they realize in today's landscape that they need to have some kind of cybersecurity, but they don't know anything about it. So we're here to provide the consultative sell. I'm going to bring them in and we're going to talk about, their digital footprint, see what their requirements are, and understand their business and their infrastructure. But then we're going to talk about what elements of cybersecurity you need and what elements you don't need. Do you have intellectual property? Are you concerned about data loss prevention, or maybe that's not a consideration at all? But we want to consult with the endpoints and things of that nature. So we talk about there's a lot of acronyms in the cybersecurity industry, in the computer industry in general. So I want to have the opportunity to share with those clients of mine what is a firewall, what it does, what is a next gen firewall, and what it does, and what it doesn't do. And one of the things that I lead with in all these situations is cybersecurity awareness training. It's not a, it's not a hard, fast requirement, but is the strongest recommendation I can give because the human factor is going to be the weakest element in any defensive strategy. So I want to make sure that you, as my customer, are going to understand that we need to educate your users because your users are the weakest point of entry for any sort of a cyber attack. So without going into too much detail, that's kinda how we got to where we are. We are focused on the SMB, mid-sized businesses. We can scale up, but we're really about making sure that you understand what you need and what we're gonna give you or to sell you. I'm not gonna sell you a box that has a bunch of junk in it that you don't need. I'm gonna sell you exactly what you need. I have a whole, portfolio of products that I'm just going to piece together all the elements you need, and we're going to get you secure so that you can focus on your business and not on my business.
I love that. I mean, I'm from also Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, I'm in New York now.
Yeah.
Much different place. Definitely a lot of small businesses there that I'm sure could benefit from your services. It's interesting how, you're marketing towards basically enterprise quality versus for a small business. So when you say small business, medium-sized business, how big are these companies? Is there any specific industries that you go after or that just make more sense? Um,
Well, it's funny, and I'll get to how we got into SMB specifically. A few years ago, I was working for IBM, and the interesting part about IBM is, for those in sales, that IBM is notoriously adamant about not doing splits. So you can only sell to companies that are headquartered in your territory. And, that was after I'd moved to Denver and realized that as a large enterprise, person, there's not a lot of large enterprise companies that are headquartered here in Colorado. I mean, I could think of maybe about a dozen off the top of my head. There are a few more, but ultimately, there's so many more small businesses. And I had a mentor a few years ago when I was working on, the idea behind, starting my own company. He's like, volume solves everything. So if you can bring in more of the little guys and less of the big guys, it all evens out in the end. And ultimately, it came back to, you know, my background and thinking about Indiana in my hometown, a grand total, population 1,500. And I was like, if any of those people ever had a cybersecurity issue, they're toast. They won't be able to survive it. So that kind of thought process percolated through my head for a while, and I thought, you know what? I can be that advocate for the SMB because I'm going to be teaching. That's just part of my nature, and that's kind of the approach. And these people need to have some knowledge of what they have, but they don't need to be experts. I'm the expert for them. So that's where a lot of my VCSO offerings come into play, where I'll help you develop your governance strategy, your security policies, and we will improve your security posture as it makes sense over time. So ultimately, that's how we got to focusing on the SMB, and at some level, it feels better. I mean, I could make a lot more money selling to large enterprise, I'm sure, but I'm not. I'm not teaching them because they've got staff. They already know this kind of thing. So and they're working directly with big name vendors like Palo Alto, and whatnot. So I don't need to dance in those circles anymore. I did my job for King and Country in those large enterprise companies, and I've worked for a number of them. But I feel more comfortable here, where I feel like I'm having a real impact on people's businesses and other lives. I mean, I'm making sure that they can sleep, soundly at night, not worried about did I have enough protection. What's going to happen for tomorrow.
well, I think that's got to be pretty rewarding too, and it's got to feel better. I mean, it's a much more human way of doing business, and these people really just need the guidance and help. Um, and it's for example, I mean, I know a salon owner here in New York City where his his payroll and all of his client data got hacked and hijacked because he had weak security maybe he gave out his password to too many people.
Sure, if you want to get into the technology, that stuff is never going away. I had a customer who, and it was a very insidious plan. I don't know, and I never really figured out who it was. We kind of had a country of origin, but we never, put handcuffs on anybody. But he got hacked, and it was, it was essentially income tax fraud. He was a tax preparer, and some of his stuff was being altered in transit from his office to the IRS. And you talk about sophistication. There was nothing on prem. It wasn't anything his fault. It took some, serious, some pretty interesting forensic examination to figure out where and how it happened. But ultimately, this is everybody has these issues. So when we start talking about locking down systems, one of the things, and of course, a lot of our software today is cloud based. It's all on the internet. So from your home or your office to the internet, it's the wild blue yonder. It's the wild, wild west. And there's all sorts of challenges and threats out there. So first thing that will help lock down your security is if your platforms will support and require MFA, the multi-factor authentication. That's where you log in, your username and your password, and it sends you a code, or it asks you for a code from your authentication app. This may seem like fuss to a lot of people, but this is the first and easiest and one of the best ways to protect yourself. A lot of the products that I've worked with over the years, the evolution to get to support MFA has been, ongoing. But, I worked for a company, not too long ago that was, number 2 in the PAM space, privileged access management. And one of the biggest, amazing I get excited about it because I'm a geek, was that, they were introducing, MFA to their solution so that when you check out an ID to log into your environments as an administrator, it asks you for your MFA challenge over and over again, just to ensure that, hey, somebody may have gotten your phone and may have gotten in, but we're going to continue to ask all the way along so that we can verify every step of the way that you are who you say you are. And, most people are so tied to their phones, they're walking across the street or looking at their phones and whatnot. You're not going to lose your phone. You're not going to misplace your phone in most cases. So putting an app on your phone that you can click, look at, type in the number, and you're off to the races, that really isn't so much burden as the dangers of not having it.
Yeah.
So MFA is the first thing. There's cybersecurity training, MFA. Those are the first 2 steps. It goes from there. But yeah, I've been a big advocate of MFA, and that's the one thing that I teach in some of my cybersecurity classes is cybersecurity. There's a middle ground. There is a point where cybersecurity gets in the way of business, and it's just too cumbersome to do your job. But at the same time, if you eliminate it entirely, you're unsafe. So you've got to find a happy ground where your employees, your workers can tolerate the extra drudgery of, okay, I type in another 6-digit number versus the risk of what happens if they don't. You can spoof, you can capture, you can hijack sessions. There's all sorts of dangerous things that can happen there. So that's the big thing is MFA, and it's pretty commonplace these days now. Most stuff, most applications and whatnot have an MFA bit. So that's my first recommendation is if you want to get serious about security, make sure that you can tolerate and you turn on MFA everywhere you can.
Yeah, no, MFA is definitely becoming more and more prominent. We're seeing it a lot. I know, you know, speaking with a couple folks in the industries out here that we talk to, it seems like sometimes it's a little annoying for some people. It's like that fine
It
line.
is.
I'm like, yeah, so it might be a little bit annoying, but this is going to save you so much headache down the line if something actually were to happen. And it's also about like educating them and explaining that this isn't to inconvenience you. This is to save you some trouble in the long run.
Sure. There are alternatives also. There's these little devices. I'd be remiss. I'm not dropping product here, but it's a YubiKey. I got a
Sweet.
buddy
What
who
is it?
lives YubiKey. Yubico is a company that provides. They make these keys, and they're just a USB key. They make them in USB A. They have them in USB C now. They're just a device that you plug in and you tap it. But the challenge with them is configuration. And if you're in a corporate environment, your IT guys are going to configure them and hand them out to you. In your home environment, if you're a small business, whatnot, you might need to set them up, or you might need somebody like me to come and set them up for you. But essentially, you plug this in and you tap it, and it basically keeps your keys, your private public key, if you're getting into the cryptology thing, on there so that it identifies you. So this is an alternative to MFA. Um, they're about 75 bucks a piece, retail. I don't know, corporate level pricing and so forth, but I got a couple at a trade show and I use them, but they're really good for web-based stuff. You can use them for other things, but if you just want to look into the general technology, it's called a FIDO key, FIDO, or FIDO2 is the protocol. But they're great little products for just, I don't want to deal with all the codes in the phone and all that stuff. I'm just gonna have this on my key ring or whatnot, and I'll plug it in and tap it when I need to authenticate to the website. So it's another form. I mean, I'm a cryptography nut. I'll admit it. I got my first book of cryptography back in 1998. I don't have the math to get into designing, but I understand what they do. So I understand the algorithms and I can explain how they're implemented. But I really do enjoy, the technology. I've been watching the post quantum cryptography movement right now, which is still kind of moving. It's kind of a moving target right now, and I know that NIST has certified a couple of protocols for it. I'm still looking for some good, solid implementations. But the bottom line is, and it's I don't want to cast a fear and distrust out there, but quantum computers are getting closer and closer to being a mainstream reality. When they do, the conventional cryptography algorithms that we use today and we take it for granted are going to be completely inadequate. And the reason for that, and just in layman's terms for anybody listening, the cryptography algorithms today, asymmetric cryptography, is based on public and private key. You publicize your public key, people can encrypt stuff with that and then send it to you. And the only people who can decrypt it are you, the owner of the private key. These keys are based on calculations in large prime numbers and really the factoring of large prime numbers. So what we have with quantum computers, the way that the math works, the way that the computer works, is they can break down those large factored primes so much faster than your conventional binary computer. So much faster than the fact that something that would take me, decades to determine, to break down on my desktop machine here with 32 gigs of RAM and, an i9 and all that kind of stuff would take a matter of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes on a quantum computer. So those nation states that have the ability to fund those kind of computers are going to be able to break your encryption. So how do we fix that? And that's the real question today. But ultimately, there are directions that we can take and measures we can take. We can increase the size of our keys. It will slow down our decryption process, but it'll make it more safe. Um, it's not. There's no easy answers for it yet, but it's one of those areas that I understand well enough to articulate and explain why it's an issue and what we can do to protect that. Again, part of it is just a matter of how long does your data need to be secure. If I'm sending you an email with the financials this quarter, is that going to be something that's even an issue next quarter? In a month after the public release, the SEC announcements and whatnot, do we need to keep it secret for that long? Does it matter? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Intellectual property being what it is, that's and then we start talking about different ways. Like I said, mentioned earlier, data loss prevention. There are ways to do that. So we get back to the world of authentication and authorization. And you were asking before about trends in the industry, and I think that's one of the big trends that I've seen in the last 5 years or so. Is that a common slogan is that identity is the new perimeter. Your network is no longer the perimeter because now people are remote. Offices are virtual. I mean, we don't have a physical office today because we are a small, lean organization, and our people are scattered around. Because I've chosen people that I know and I've interviewed and have vetted that have the right skill set for our organization. And we've got them in Oregon, in Iowa, Texas, Florida. So we're all over the place, and we can do that, but then we don't have that network perimeter anymore. So now it's all identity and checking to make sure that you're the same person you were when you logged in, MFA, that sort of thing. This all comes back to, securing our digital footprint or digital landscape today. So really it's all about identity and how do we govern that? How do we, maintain it? How do we ensure that it's, protected and robust?
How far along this super it's super interesting. How far along do you think these computers are from being active today? Are there certain
Quantum computers.
Yeah,
Um, Quantum computers are, if I remember correctly, categorized in um, a metric called qubits. And if I remember correctly, the Chinese have a working computer with 930 qubits. IBM is working on one as well. I don't know all the details. Again, my data might be stale at this point in time, but it's going to be sooner than later.
yeah.
People are people are very motivated to make it work. Now, the challenges are making it commercial and making it commonplace because these supercomputers, these quantum computers are very fragile and they generate a lot of heat. So there's, tremendous cooling, like liquid nitrogen level cooling that happens to keep them operational. So not everybody can have one of these yet.
Right.
As the technology increases, I mean, we looked at the Moore's law, and we've seen, the silicon we use today, from the Pentium chip up to the i9 and further. That 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 has happened within my lifetime. That has happened within the last 25 years. I mean, it's amazing how fast the computational power has increased in that period of time. And so this is just an extension of that. People are trying to get the quantum computers working because, I mean, they'll be faster. Now, the challenge, from me and for, pretty much anybody is, okay, great. The computer can work just as fast as we need it to, but now, how about me interacting with it across the network? How are we going to speed that up? And of course, we got 5G now, and I'm sure that they'll continue to increase those those parameters as well. So our limits are really going to come down to the network soon, because we've decentralized everything's cloud based. Most things are. So it's going to be the network next.
I think we're gonna have to, revisit this conversation in about 10 years and then see where we're at.
Well, yeah, well, it's funny because, I remember growing up, in the 90s, when Star Trek Next Generation came out and they had these little tablets and, whatnot. And I mean, I was the first one in line to get an iPad when it came out. I've got I've got one of the newer generation ones on me now, but I use it all the time.
Yeah.
And, I don't think twice about it. But if you go back 20 years, you look at that as like, wow, that's really impressive. So the bottom line is that technology moves at a tremendous pace. With the advent of AI, it's going to move even faster because we're going to have, artificial intelligence to be able to drill down on this stuff a lot faster than what human brains are used to doing. So we may be able to, stretch out Moore's law a little further and get better technologies or thinner technologies. I mean, I think, the areas that are of keenest interest to me are power, batteries. How do we make something like an iPad last for more than a day without recharging it? Um, and so I think that, and then again, how do we make that, economically, no, ecologically, palatable? So, there's a whole other area to unwrap there that goes outside of, IT. But I'm a science geek. I'm a technology geek, so it's all part of the package.
Yeah, no, definitely. So going back to, your clients, the people that you help,
Sure.
you mentioned that you offer an education course, which I think is super helpful. You want to have two different ways to verify, right? What are the major problems that and do they come to you with problems, or are you reaching out to them proactively? How are they describing their issues with cybersecurity to you?
Well, it just it depends on the client. It depends on their, their position on the growth curve, in their maturity. When I was back at the PAM company I mentioned, we had a maturity model growth where it starts with, you know, MFA and PAM, and it goes on to zero trust. So it's your security posture and your attitude or your appetite for that higher level security. I mean, you're looking and you're working in higher um, level organizations, large enterprise organizations, those vendor type organizations. You're going to have a lot more security. People are going to be used to it because it's the standard operating procedure. If you're building a company from scratch and you've got 10 employees in an office, you don't have those kind of concerns. So it really comes down to, your particular environment. It's not something that I can prescribe, you know, oh, you need, a GLP-1, or you need, this for your heart, your blood pressure. I can't give you a generic answer because it's tailored to every person's needs. If I'm talking to a chain of pizzerias, they might have 10 different pizzerias around town. Do they need data loss prevention? No. Do they really need MFA? Not necessarily. Maybe for the accounting stuff, and they might want to have some sort of authentication for people logging into the POS system, taking orders and whatnot. But a lot of that stuff comes through the website, and they've got an app. So it really comes down to what their needs are. And like, first of all, they need uh they need internet. If they're cloud based, every one of those locations needs to have internet, and probably redundant internet. I mean, I spent those years in Chicago back from 2000 to 2010 doing high availability and disaster recovery. And cybersecurity is really just an extension of that. HADR is a factor or a subdomain within cybersecurity. So, I had these conversations with large clients, small clients, and everyone in between. Is like, okay, if you suffer a loss, if your internet goes down, how long is it gonna be for it come back before it comes back up? What is your SLA with the telecom company? If they say, "We've got 99% uptime," what does that mean? You can do the math. When I used to talk about 4 nines or 5 nines, when you have 5 nines availability, that means you got, like, 8 minutes of downtime per year. Those tolerances become very, very tight. So when you have the requirement to be up that much, what are you gonna do about it? And this is the same conversation I have with my customers today. I talk with a business owner and I said, "What are your digital assets? Do you have a database that maintains all your order management? Okay, what happens if that database goes away? If it's corrupted, if it's, ransomware, if it somehow just dies and you don't have a backup, how long will it be before you restore from tape? Are you backing up at all? If you are, great. How long is that backup gonna take? And how long is it gonna take you to recover to the point in time that it happened? And now, if that's 8 hours, okay, 8 hours. How much money are you losing in that 8 hours? Because it's gonna happen in the middle of a production day. It's not gonna happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. It'd be great if it did. That way you've got, from 3 to 10, 3 to 11. You might miss a couple hours of work there. Be great if it happened at 10 o'clock at night, and then you can get it up and running by 6 o'clock in the morning. But is that realistic? Probably not.
Right.
So the worst case scenario is you got 8 hours of downtime. If you're making $100,000 an hour, that 8 hours of downtime is just short of $1 million. $800,000 goes a long way. Now let's take 10, 20% of that. You know, 10%, 80, 20%, $160,000. You spend $160,000 on your cybersecurity footprint to mitigate and to prevent that from happening. That's better than an insurance policy because you're getting something out of it. You're not just paying money in hopes that it's going to be okay if something goes bad. You've got plans. So is that 20%, is that 10% worth that extra, 80%, that extra, 600 and, what, 600, 700 and $640,000 that you'll lose if you do have an event. And that's a problem we have with a lot of people. "Oh, my company's doing okay. I haven't had any events. We won't do it. We don't need to do anything until we have a problem." If you don't do anything until you have a problem, it's already too late
Right.
because you haven't prepared for that. You haven't prepared for failure. And if you can prepare for failure, you're prepared, and this you can use whatever analogies in sports analogies or whatever preparedness analogies you can come up with here. People who race, people who, have athletic, contests and whatnot, they prepare and they train and they're ready to, take an injury and jump back up and get back into the fray. Same with business. If you're not ready to take an injury and jump back into the fray, you are preparing to fail. So if you prepare for failure, you can recover that much more gracefully.
It sounds like you really care for your clients, and a lot of your job is really also educating them on exactly what these risks really are. I always like to ask, when you're speaking to clients, what if you had a magic wand, what could you do to make things a little easier for you? What could you do to fix something that may not be working as well or could use some more efficiency?
I think that I won't answer that one directly only because it sticks in my mind that the biggest part about what I do is the human factor.
Right.
I'm here building relationships, and I when I got into sales back in 2005 at Veritas, I had an area director. He went on to be, SVP of worldwide sales. A man that I really, really respect. His name is Rich Spring, and he didn't have a background in business. His degree was in communication. And it showed because this is a man who, fairly soft spoken, but he was the kind of, you know, I'm trying to think of the John Houseman commercial from years ago, but E.F. Hutton, when people talk, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. When Rich would talk, people were enraptured, and because he was very elegant, very eloquent, and one of the things in my very first, group meeting, area meeting was he's talking about being a trusted advisor. And I'm hearing these words. And again, I'm coming in from being an individual contributor to being a salesperson. And from rural Indiana to, big town, Chicago, and whatnot. So big city, companies. And I hear this for the first time, and it's just like, "Oh, okay, buzzword, 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 buzzword." I'm not into that. I'm more authentic than that. I'm grassroots. Well, over time, I kept hearing it, and it wasn't necessarily that I was hearing the same things. It was how he was sharing that quality in the conversation. And it at some point in time, it ringed true. The ring of truth finally came through, and I understood better than a lot of my colleagues did, that trusted advisor relationship is the most important thing you can have.
Yeah.
Your relationships matter. People, if you have the best widget on the market, people might buy it, but ultimately, people will buy from you because they trust you, because you put in the work to establish that relationship. I want to know, how is your business doing? I may even go as far as to understand more about your life, your personal life, your family. Hey, how are the kids? How's the wife? How these things that they're involved in. I'm taking an interest in your life and business, not because I want to be nosy and not because I just want to be conversational, but I want to understand what's driving you when you're in the office. I want to understand, where your thoughts are and understand where your concerns are. And the more I get involved, I'm ingratiating myself to you, but I'm actually trying to offload what I do so that you can focus on your business. And that was one thing that I've kind of really come to memorialize over the last 15 years is we're in this to help you. Again, the buzzwords come out, the phrases come out, and a lot of times they sound shallow, tinty, and hollow. But when it comes down to it, I want you because you know more about pottery, you know more about print screening, you know more about uh, you know digital marketing, you know more about whatever it is you're doing than I do. But you need to do something that I do. So you're coming to me so I can take care of it for you. So your success is a measure of my success, not the bottom line. I mean, the bottom line takes care of itself if you take care of your customers. When I was literally at my third job out of college, I was working as a configuration manager. It was a fancy word of saying I was a root administrator without the root password. But I was trying to, I was vying for the manager's position, a real manager's position. And my VP said, the first thing I could tell you is that you need to make the success of your subordinates a measure of your success. If they're successful, you're successful. And, it's always stuck with me. Thanks, Carl. But it really comes down to it goes into sales as well about I want to make sure that you are successful. If you're not successful as a business, I'm not going to be successful because I'm going to lose my clients. So, from an altruistic perspective, yes, I want to make sure that you're successful. From a personal survivability perspective, yes, I'm motivated to make sure that you're successful because I need you to continue to pay your bills to me. There is always a level of business underneath the covers there, but at the higher level, what drives this and what makes me feel good about the business is the fact that I'm helping people with their business.
This has been incredible conversation here. For our listeners, what are a few easy, quick tips that you would say you would give just off the top of your head to increase?
Now, it's this time of year, Black Friday's coming up in a little over a month. When you get that email that says Amazon is giving away free iPads, don't believe it. It's fake. Um, Email is the biggest, easiest vector of attack right now. So when you're at the office, when you're working on the office computers, you really need to exercise your email discipline better.
If
Don't send out stuff.
it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Don't click on
It so
ads.
is. I mean, there are. I mean, that's the easy stuff. I mean, there are stuff out there that is so elaborate that it's amazing. One of the things that I see, and I get some of these every now and then. I'll save them for my classes. Is they'll have something that it's targeted. They'll have my name on there. They'll if you look at the websites though, or the email addresses, it sometimes goes back to somewhere else. If you get an email from Google or, the one I've seen before is like bank, um, is Citibank, I guess it might have been Citibank or some of the one of the major banks where they've actually taken the A's and they've used Cyrillic A's. So they registered a domain name that is Citibank, but instead of the A being, A, it's a Cyrillic A. So it goes to some other website. I can't tell you, I wouldn't be fair to say who was sponsoring that, but anybody could do it. And then if it looks like the website, you might be lulled into a sense of comfort there. I just got a new credit card. I got literally, and I am a Citibank customer. I got twice in the last month phone calls from somebody saying they were calling from Citibank, and they were asking me, could please confirm the expiration date on my credit card? And I'm like, you know what the expiration date of my credit card is because you're Citibank.
You gave it to me.
The last time, and this woman on the phone, she was persistent. I give her credit. And I'm like, okay, I just kept this conversation going. We must have talked for almost 10 minutes. And I said, you know what my expiration date is. If I give you my expiration date, that just happens to be one of those key elements that would allow you to use my stolen card number
Yep.
with the expiration date to actually make a purchase.
They
And one of them was like,
they
I
can
mean, these scams are everywhere. So
Yeah.
it takes a critical mind to recognize when they're there those banks will call you when they think there's fraudulent activity, but they're not going to ask for your information. They're going to maybe send you a code that you need to reiterate to them that you are who you say you are. They're going to verify your identity that way, but how do you verify their identity? So I turned around, I hung up with her. I immediately called Citibank and I said, "Can you just cancel and send me a new card? Because this happened twice in the last month, so my number is out in the wild."
Exactly.
And yeah, so just protect yourself. And there's a certain level of common sense that comes into it, and maybe just a little extra that, people that might not agree is common sense, but just protect yourself. If it's too good to be true, it most likely is.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much again, John, for taking the time. I mean, amazing conversation. A couple of takeaways. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Don't click on it. Don't give the pass key. Um, Proactive measures are essential here, and partnering with companies like Prometheus Cybersecurity can really make all the difference. So I want to thank you again. And where can my audience find you?
Problemcyber.com.
Awesome. Uh, well, thanks again, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All right.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.